أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. We seek refuge in Allah from the accursed shaitan. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, most merciful, especially merciful. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana. Glory be to you, O Allah. There is no knowledge for us except that which you teach us. Allahumma 'allimna ma yanfa'una wa zidna 'ilma. O Allah, teach us that which will be beneficial for us and increase us in knowledge. Warzuqna fahma, and grant us understanding. Ya muqallib al-qulub, O change of hearts, thabbit qulubana ala dinik, keep our hearts firm on your deen. Allahumma ja'al a'malana khalisatan liwajhik. O Allah, grant our actions to be done sincerely for your sake. Wa la taj'al fiha haddan li ghayrik, and let there not be in them a portion for other than you. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. I'm just going to just 1 second. Sorry about that. I just wanted to close the window because it's making a noise. A huge warm welcome from myself, Wasfia and Talib, on behalf of Muslims Connected to tonight's session on mental health and Muslims. This is a really much needed topic, and we're really excited to have you all with us and very excited for our guest speaker. My name is Wasfia Talib, and I am the wife of Masood Hayat, who is the founder of Muslims Connected. I myself graduated with a degree in psychology and counseling, and I'm currently doing my honors in psychology as well, with the intention of going into the field of psychology. And in my studies, I did cover or have had the opportunity to look at the research that is currently available on Muslims and mental health. So I'm very excited about this topic, and I'm sure those of you who are in the field are also really looking forward to today. So our facilitator today is Mariam Salie, who is a clinical psychologist and lecturer in psychology at Stanford University. She completed her undergraduate degree at the University of the Western Cape, UWC, majoring in psychology and linguistics. Thereafter, she completed her BA honors in psychology at UWC as well. She completed her master's in clinical psychology and community counseling at Stanford University. Her internship was completed at 2 military hospitals, and 1 year community service was done at the Department of Correctional Services. She is registered with the HPCSA, the Health Professionals Council of South Africa, and is in private practice part-time. She joined the psychology department in October 2018, and is currently enrolled for her PhD studies, which focuses on Muslim mental health. So what she's going to be covering today will be resistance and silence on mental health issues within the Muslim community, gender and mental health, religiosity and mental health, generational differences on perceptions of mental health, the importance of creating awareness of mental health, as well as evidence from the Quran and Sunnah. So I would like to warmly welcome Sister Mariam Salie to present her topic to us this evening. Please submit your questions related to the session via the Google form, which you will find in the chat box, okay? And at the end of her session, she will be answering any of the, or all of the, or as many questions as possible that are related to the topic. So kindly keep your questions related to the topic, okay? Because if it's not on topic, then we won't answer them. So that is all from my side. Shukran to all of you once again for joining us live this evening in Cape Town and from Cape Town. And I warmly welcome Sister Mariam Salie to deliver her topic on Muslims and mental health.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everyone. Shukran so much for joining us this evening and for coming out to listen to my talk. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So tonight's topic will be on Muslim mental health. And as Wasfiya mentioned, this is part of my PhD study where I am talking about looking at explanatory models of mental health conditions amongst Muslims and discussing or interviewing different stakeholder groups in order to get different perspectives. So I just want to give a short disclaimer. The content of this presentation reflects the views of the participants of my study. You may or may not agree with it, so I just wanted you to know that whatever I'm discussing here is what I have, information that I've obtained from my participants. So there are 4 stakeholder groups that I'm interviewing, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'll only be talking about 2 groups. And this is the Muslim Service Users Group and the General Muslim Public. So the Muslim Service Users Group, they are Muslim adults who have been treated by a mental health professional, meaning that they have sourced a service, a mental health service. And in the General Muslim Public, this was done through focus groups. And these are adult Muslims who basically share their understanding of mental health. As I mentioned, this is preliminary findings and just some reflections from my side. So one of the first things that came up was the fact that this is a topic that is actually not spoken about, that people do not want to talk about. There was a reluctance to participate. And for the study, I partnered with Accidental Muslims who posted their adverts on their platforms. And despite having thousands of views, only 38 participants eventually were a part of the study. There were a few inquiries, and these people opted not to participate after hearing that we'll be talking about the topic of mental health. And despite my assurances that we would be, everything would be confidential and that I would be anonymizing their names, people still did not wish to participate. So there seems to be a history of silence around this topic, that this mental health is something that we do not talk about. It is a topic that is not discussed amongst family and families within the Muslim community. And many participants reported that they came to learn about mental health as they got older and interacted with the world around them. And because knowledge is more readily available these days, many reported doing their own research in order to understand mental health a bit better. So everything they knew about mental health. So from the 2 groups, those who had accessed the mental health service, they learned about mental health through the experience of condition. And for those in the focus groups who were just sharing their experiences, they learned about mental health through the research that they did themselves. Because growing up, it was as if mental health issues did not exist. And everything that people experienced was attributed to religiosity or your level of Islam. And this is something I'll talk about a bit later, because the reasons that were given for people experiencing any kind of mental health condition was because they had a low level of Islam or Iman, or it was attributed to the presence of jinn or, shaitan, certain behaviors like going outside of the maghrib or the evil eye. And then some participants reported that they were even prohibited from talking about their mental health issues. So those who were experiencing mental health conditions, in some cases, they were prohibited from talking about it, but even for making it aware to people that they were experiencing a mental health condition, right? So this was swept under the carpet. And this, of course, is related to the attribution of mental health as a reflection of religiosity. And I will explain or talk about this a little bit later on, but I just want you to understand that, or from participants' perspectives, that because it was seen as something that was connected to your Islam or you as a Muslim, it was something that was seen as shameful, and so people, did not talk about it. And one of the reasons they didn't talk about it was also because of the negative labeling that's associated with mental health. I've put the words there, Utati, and it sounds funny, but this is a word that is quite common. And I don't think there was one participant who did not know this word. So it's a word that people have grown up with, that refers to people who we now understand to have possibly experienced a mental health condition themselves, but people were being labeled as tati, as crazy, as mad, as something being wrong with them, and people were socialized into distancing themselves from from people who identified as tati. I just want to make sure that people can hear me. I hear that someone says that there is no sound. Is it back on? Okay. So as I was saying, this is a word that was being used to identify people, and people were socialized into distancing themselves because it was seen that someone who was tati or who was crazy was someone who was unpredictable, someone who you never know what to expect, and someone who could harm you. And so this is how people were socialized to understand someone in that condition. And of course, now that knowledge is more available, now that we understand more, understand that it was possible that this person may have been experiencing a health condition. And because of the way that participants were socialized into thinking about mental health, by experiencing mental health conditions themselves, they actually experienced extreme guilt and shame because they were diagnosed with a mental health condition. And of course, this ties into, again, to the concept of religiosity, but also because it is seen as that there's something wrong with them. So there's something wrong with them, perhaps they are tati themselves. It's not something that you talk about, and that you're not a good enough Muslim because you are experiencing this mental health condition. And of course, it was, it was something frowned upon for the family also, because now you are bringing shame onto the family as well. So is mental health real? Does it exist? This is still a debate within the Muslim community. For many, mental health is still a foreign concept, or it's considered a Western concept, and yes, even a white concept, white people things. It is not considered a health issue, and it is often responded to with indifference, but more so, it is often dismissed. And the challenge with not acknowledging the legitimacy of mental health conditions is that the mental health condition will remain untreated. Now I want to get to gender and mental health. So as I mentioned, there were two groups that I interviewed: Muslim service users, where I did individual interviews, the general Muslim public, where it was a focus group discussion. I have indicated the Muslim service users in the peach color and general Muslim public in the orange. And you can see that for the individual interviews, I only had 2 males and I had 18 females in total. And in the group with the focus groups, I had 5 males and I had 13 females. So what was interesting is that the 2 male participants who did the individual interviews were 2 males who had experienced mental health conditions, but they were encouraged to participate by a female friend who was in the focus groups. And then with the general Muslim public, there was more interest by males also, I thought. 3 of the males were sort of brought along by the females who had participated. One indicated that he was actually busy with a study himself and was curious to know how, how one would run a group like this when you're doing research. And so he was participating more to also, have the experience and be a part of it and see, how it works. I tried not to take offense at that one. And then there was actually essentially only one male who participated because he was truly and genuinely interested in participating in the study and in learning. And I highlight this because it was interesting that there was such a small amount of males who participated in the study, and it is something that I see in my private practice as well. Very few males actually seek professional services when it comes to mental health. And I explored this with the two males, and I asked them, I said, you were one of two who actually participated in the study. How do you understand it? How do you make sense of it? And they said, well, growing up in the Muslim community, they were socialized with the belief that males do not express emotion because it is a sign of weakness, and that males should not talk about, or they don't experience challenges and struggles. They have to carry on as if they are not experiencing any of those things, and males definitely do not need therapy. So again, the problem with this is that any mental health condition experienced by males with this kind of belief will remain untreated, but more so, as is the case with generational patterns, this kind of thinking will be passed on to their sons. And there's so much more to talk about this topic in particular, but I think we need a separate discussion for that. Sorry about that. Okay, so I think that this is a topic that kind of needs to be explored on its own, because I think there's so much more to say about it. And I think for me, the main concern here is carrying over this kind of belief. If males are having this kind of thinking that they're not allowed to express emotion, and again, if we think back to the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he expressed emotion, he dealt with emotion. But if we are taught that we're not allowed to express emotion or not allowed to have emotion, then, this will be passed on, and it then becomes a cycle. And that is not something that we want. So now we go to religiosity and mental health. Now, one of the common themes that emerged was the concept of religiosity and its association with poor mental health. One of the first responses to an experience of mental health condition is that it is because of a lack of iman or lack of faith, not making enough salah, not praying enough, or not being sincere enough in the play or in the ibadah, not reading enough Quran, and not making enough ibadah. So it's assumed that a decline of the mental health state is directly associated with a person's level of religiosity. And many participants actually expressed outrage at this assumption, because for many of them, they were making even more ibadah than they were supposed to at the time, as a means to try and feel better. And this kind of thinking, the stance, it insinuates that the person is in control and can choose to be ill or not. It also assumes that the person is not a good enough Muslim and responsible for the experience. And of course, if the core mental illness is seen to be the lack of spirituality or it means that the cure is understood to be an increase of religious acts. So in order to feel better, or in order to come out of the state, one needs to make more salah, one needs to read more Quran, one needs to be a better Muslim and rely solely on Allah. And again, the issue with this understanding or belief is that, once again, the mental health condition does not receive appropriate treatment, and the person does not receive or have access to support. And don't get me wrong, I believe there's room for religion in the treatment process of mental health. In fact, in my private practice, I often work with Muslim clients, and I always use, it's always religion is always used in treatment as part of the treatment, as one of the support systems. But room has to be made for professional mental health treatment as well, so that we can have holistic treatments. The next topic is mental health and the unseen world. Now, many Muslims believe in the world of the unseen, We are aware that all of this exists. The evil eye, nafs, jinn possession, the influence of shaitan on behavior, bad omen. But it is important that if someone is suffering, we need to assess the situation. We need to evaluate so that we can ensure that an accurate diagnosis can be made so that the person can receive an appropriate treatment. And if the case is that this is the case, then this will be the treatment. But if it is that the situation is that the person is actually suffering from depression or anxiety or any other mental health condition, that they are able to receive the appropriate treatment. Several participants reported that when they disclosed to their family that this is what they've been experiencing, they were told that they were probably possessed, and they were taken to a sheikh or maulana to be mantrad or exorcised. And after the experience, they were still very much depressed and very much in need of treatment. When we look at another thing that stood out was the different generations and the different thinking across those generations. So I found that with the older participants, there was this firm belief and thinking, and this is how they were socialized, that only Allah has the cure. And that if they, I remember one participant, she was in her 60s, and she said, she actually sought a mental health service because she was exposed to it through someone that she knew. And she felt so guilty going to see a psychologist, although she felt like it was helping her so much. She made sure that no one knew where she was going. She tried to look to make sure no one saw her there. And she felt extremely guilty sitting there because she had been socialized into the belief that only Allah has the cure and you need to rely only on Allah alone. And if you are relying on anyone else besides Allah, again, that means that you're not being a good Muslim by going to a source other than your creator. Then you find the middle-aged groups, they are also believe that, you need to rely on Allah, but they are open to the idea of therapy or any other mental health service. And together they feel that can develop into the cure. And then you find that with the younger generation, they are much more open to the idea of professional mental health services and would see only that as being as having the cure. So for me, I don't know. I think people must look at this and they can reflect on it and see where does your thinking lie? Because like I said, for me, I think that professional mental health services are important, but I think that your religion can also play a role in assisting in a holistic kind of treatment. So why is creating awareness so important? And I was, in preparing for this talk, I was trying to think about what parts am I going to focus on, because there's so much that you can talk about, but which parts do I think is most important? And I apologize for the noise. And I thought that what I want to do is just to give a little bit of information of the kind of things that participants brought as important to them and their experience. And this is mostly from people who had experienced mental health conditions themselves, and the kind of responses they got and the kind of responses they wish they had gotten. So I thought that for me, the most important part of all of this is creating awareness. And why is it important to create awareness? Because firstly, there's so much stigma around mental health within the Muslim community. Mental health is seen as a blight on family integrity, that you're bringing shame on the family. It is viewed as something shameful for yourself. It is viewed as something disgraceful. It is considered a taboo topic, so it's not spoken about. It's swept under the carpet, and so people cannot ask questions, they cannot talk about it, they cannot discuss it, they cannot share information or resources. People who experience mental health conditions are often seen as less of a person, or in some cases less of a Muslim, because you're experiencing this situation. And because of all this negative stereotyping, people don't talk about it. They don't talk about their struggles. Many of the participants reported to me how they often suffer in silence, where they feel so alone because they cannot talk about it. They're not allowed to talk about it. And when they do, there's this negative response, when they talk about it. So often, people experiencing mental health conditions, they are suffering in silence. And for me, that was something that really got me, because I I think that, we're a community, and I really think that we can support each other. I remember, I'm not sure if people are aware, but during last year, there was a happening where a young boy completed suicide. And I remember there was a debate about what happened in the Muslim community. And my first thought was, if this boy felt so alone that he thought that there was no other option, then what does it say about us? Have we failed this young boy that we couldn't provide the support that he needed in order to find a different way of dealing with whatever struggles that he had? These are all just thoughts that I was left with this happening. And I think it's part of the reason why I embarked on the study, is because I really think that mental health is so important within the Muslim community. It should be so important in Islam, and we need to start somewhere. And I must say, with all of that, I must say that there have been shifts. I have seen shifts. I mean, I work with people all the time. So I have seen that there are shifts in how people are talking about mental health and how they view mental health, but the shifts are very, very small. And it's important for us to educate ourselves and for us to understand mental health, because if we can educate ourselves, we can destigmatize mental health. We can learn how to recognize what the symptoms are. We can learn about treatment options. We can learn about resources, and we can essentially work together in order to get someone the help that they need. For example, if our ulama were trained in recognizing the basic mental health symptoms, they could then make referrals if necessary, and likewise, if psychologists are faced with symptoms that are, let's say, not psychological, but possibly from the unseen world, they can then work with the ulama in order to develop a suitable treatment. And of course, if the less stigma there is around mental health, the more support people affected by mental health can access. And I think we need to move away from seeing mental health as something to be ashamed of, and recognize that it is a health condition and it is treatable. It's my hope that together as a community, we can start thinking about ways to create awareness and which platforms to use to start talking about mental health. There is a lot of research currently being done in the States and elsewhere, and where they are doing a lot of work with the ulama, mental health practitioners working with ulama. So there's this idea of utilizing the pulpits and other platforms like Muslims Connected, and I'm really very happy that I was able to talk on this platform this evening, but to use these kinds of platforms to start talking about mental health and start breaking that stigma. And I was trying to think also, which verses to quote and which hadith to look at to share with you, and there's so many, and really, I think that as much as it's been a topic that was not spoken about so much before, that there are many scholars, and not only Islamic scholars, but many academic scholars that are researching mental health in Islam and Islamic psychology. And some of the ayahs that I came across, one of the first ayahs that I came across was that says, ask those of knowledge if you are not sure. And Allah does not burden a soul with more than it can bear. And verily after every difficulty is ease. And there's also hadith that the Nabi Muhammad ﷺ said, for every illness, there is a cure. And as humans, we go through trials, we go through challenges, we go through illnesses. It is part of life, just as it was for the Anbiya. Nabi Muhammad ﷺ experienced many challenges. And in 1 year, he lost so many of his close family that it was called the year of sadness, the year of grief. And in Surah Yusuf, it is spoken about Nabi Yaqub and how his eyes turned white from grief because he was so sad when he thought that Nabi Yusuf had died. So there's so many examples that we can probably get into. But for me, when I think about it, there's even a dua that the Nabi Muhammad ﷺ used to make every day to ask Allah to protect from grief and from worry. And we can make those, those du'as. And I would like to just share with everyone that there is a scholar at Stanford, Dr. Rania Awad, and they've got the Stanford Muslim Mental Health Lab. And they do a lot of research on Islamic psychology. And they've actually found that in the history, there's so much about how the earlier Muslims treated mental health, much more forward thinking than what, from the Western world, because their institutions where they treated mental health were called places of healing. And they approached it in this way. And the concept of ilm al-nafs came about in the 8th century, way before psychology came or emerged as a concept, in the Western world, which was in the 19th century. And they talk about the contributions of people like Al-Kindi, Al-Balkhi, Al-Razi, and Al-Ghazali, and their contributions to Islamic psychology or psychology itself and mental health. And it's very, very interesting to think that, we have these Islamic scholars from, in the history who actually did so much research and contributed so much on mental health. But we are here at a point where we are trying to once again, I suppose, remind people that mental health is as important as anything else in a Muslim's life. Islam is holistic in its approach to everything, and mental health shouldn't be any different. It is part of what makes us human, and I think it should be treated as important. So I'm going to leave you with that. I think we're going to take a 5-minute break. I know the Adhan went earlier. I'm going to take a 5-minute break, and in the meantime, I'm going to have a look at if there's any questions that have been submitted. I will come back after 5 minutes and I'll try to answer as many questions as I can. Shukran. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'm back. I'm having a look at some of the questions, and I might not get to all of the questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave my details with Muslims Connected. So if I haven't answered your question, you're welcome to get in touch with me. Yeah, you can welcome to get in touch with me. And I also want to say, I just had a browse through some of the questions. There are some questions that would take much more time to explain and would probably be a bit technical. So what I'm going to do with some of the questions, I think I'm going to speak to Muslims Connected to see if we can do perhaps another session where I can explain some of those questions in a bit more detail. So let's make dua that they say yes, that's okay. The first one, I don't have a question, just a request. If there's another study taking place, can I be considered? I've been struggling with mental health issues for years. Would really love to help you gather more information. Please, I'm going to leave my details and please do get in touch with me. The second one is please elaborate on OCD and how to deal with it in a marriage. I think on that point, let me just say that if there is anyone experiencing a mental health condition and you are within a marriage, it is very important that you, seek some psychoeducation so that both of you understand what the condition entails and how to manage it. It's not to say that you're wanting the partner to manage the condition, but it is important for a partner to understand what the condition entails and what some of the struggles might be. Something like OCD, it's obsessive compulsive disorder. It is a disorder that has lots of obsessive thoughts, obsessive thinking, and compulsive behaviors. So the person finds it difficult to move away from this kind of obsessive thinking, which is usually focused on one thing. It's usually focused on a particular theme. And compulsive behaviors, usually if they do not engage in those compulsive behaviors, it usually brings a lot of distress. And it takes up a lot of time, which can cause a lot of, arguments within a marriage. So I think the important thing there is to, either this, and I really think that the information on mental health is really much more readily available these days. There are sites that you can go to where you can get information. And even if you can see a psychologist just to even get some information on what it entails and how to deal with it or how to manage it together. COVID has seen us lose many loved ones unexpectedly, and some of the people in our community are finding it difficult to move on, getting further away from the Almighty. How can you assist such people who are having difficulty in this regard, and how or where do they draw this strength from if they are alone? With COVID, I think it's a different kind of grief. The thing with COVID is that there's been multiple griefs and multiple losses. There's been physical losses where we've lost people. There's been job losses. There's been the loss of our routine. There's been the loss of, normality, the loss of familiarity. So there's been lots of different losses, just all in there with each other. And especially when we've lost loved ones. And I personally know of people who've lost multiple people within the family. So it's a complicated kind of loss. And I think the first thing you need to understand is that this will take time. Some days you might feel like it's getting worse instead of getting better, but this is a normal process of grief. There are different stages of grief and we go through different emotions. And of course, as Muslims, we believe that Allah has put certain things out and we accept, but we are also human and we can feel that emotion that we are feeling. So if today you're feeling sad and you need to cry, feel sad and cry and understand where the sadness is coming from, because we are human, we have connections with our loved ones, and it was relationships that we had. It's not something that one moves on very quickly from. So, and because of COVID and the complicated nature of this pandemic, whenever something is complicated, it means that it takes longer. So there's normal grief. When you generally lose people, it takes a certain amount of time for people to move on from that. And then there's complicated grief, which takes a bit longer. So I think just reminding people that those emotions that seem to be all mixed up, that sometimes when you think today you're feeling a little better, and then tomorrow you feel like you've just gone 2 steps back, that is quite normal. And I think that many people, when they're experiencing difficulty when it comes to emotions, they often feel like they're alone, like they're the only ones who are experiencing this. And in that feeling that they're alone and that maybe they're the only ones experiencing it like this, there are other emotions that come along. They feel guilty because, I'm supposed to move on. I'm supposed to be okay with this. I'm supposed to accept this. And so this is how it becomes complicated. So I think remind people, if you do know of anyone, remind people that COVID, this pandemic, is not normal. It's been, in any kind of trauma or difficulty, one has adrenaline that helps you get through it. But any kind of trauma or difficulty is usually short-lived. With COVID, it's been here for 2 years plus. So people are tired. We are not used to having to be, fighting something for such a long period of time or dealing with something for such a long period of time. So remind people that these mixture of emotions, it's very normal. Having difficulty or feeling tired of having to deal with this, it is normal. I think just continuously remind people and be there for them. And one thing that I want to say when we are trying to be there for people is that everyone is different, right? I will deal with something differently than you deal with something. And what we sometimes do is that when we are there for people, we try to be there for them the way we would want someone to be there for us. And often this creates, difficulty. So if you want to support someone, ask them, say, I'm here, and I'm here in whichever way you need me to be. So please let me know what you need. Ask people what they need. Sometimes people just need a space to cry. Sometimes people need space, just be by themselves for a bit. All of that is normal. And I think just sometimes acknowledging that people's experiences, that alone helps them. Just acknowledging that what they're feeling is normal, that helps them. I hope that and then of course there are there are hadith that you can, or du'as that you can read and share with people on how to draw strength, from your Creator when you're feeling this way. Then are there natural treatments, lifestyle improvements one can do for bipolar, or is someone diagnosed with bipolar bound to chronic medication? One thing you must understand about mental health conditions, there are certain conditions that are chronic and that require medication. But you can also, I think also people sometimes do not understand what psychiatry and psychology is. So psychiatry is a discipline that is responsible for medication management of mental health conditions. The psychologist is someone who would help you process and help you change behavior that needs to be changed. And it's a space that you can use for, if you want to grow yourself, or if you have a mental health condition, they can assist you also with processing and getting through the mental health condition. So for something like bipolar, you would have the medication, but you can go see a psychologist who can assist you with how to deal with the consequence of that condition and how to manage the condition, how to live with it. So yes, there are certain conditions that are chronic and that do require chronic medication, but you can, there are many people who successfully live with bipolar because they've gotten the treatment and they know exactly how to manage it. Our past generations do have their wisdoms, but how do youth actually break toxic generational beliefs, perhaps more active steps? Yes, I think, when you're trying to make changes, and especially if you are perceived to be going against something that has been there for a very, very long time, it's very difficult to move away from it. But small steps and small boundaries, starting with small. And the first thing is always to educate. And again, I want to go back again to the life of the Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He had so much wisdom in how he approached these things. So there's a lot that we can learn also from him and his life and how to approach and how to make changes. You don't want to just tell someone, no, that is wrong and this is how you must do it. You need to do it with wisdom. So I think firstly, we need to have education. We need to be educated. Because if somebody understands something, they might be more willing to make the changes than someone who doesn't, right? What does Islam say about suicide, suicidal thoughts, and self-harm as a result of depression or other mental disorders? This is a topic that I actually think we require a separate discussion for. Suicide or suicidality is one of the symptoms of depression. And you will know that I've mentioned that there was actually happening in the Muslim community last year. And I think one of the biggest debates comes around whether the person, is still within the bounds of Islam or not. And the thing is that in Islam, there is a ruling around, I forget the actual Arabic word, but the ruling around when one is by your full senses or not. And of course, none of us will know. None of us can judge whether someone is by their full senses or not. And if it is, Allah protect, but if it is that a person completed suicide and they were by their full senses, then it is a sin like any other sin. But again, we would not know that. Only Allah will know that. So in terms of that, it is a sin, but there are rulings in Islam about, when you are not by your full senses. And when there's a mental health condition, most of the time, the symptoms that come about through a mental health condition, the person is not able to actually function the way that they usually do. But I'm going to leave it there because I really think that this is a topic that actually needs more time, that we wouldn't do justice by having a quick discussion about it. Next question, if a disorder is genetic, is it passed down the gender? Example, if a mother has a mental disorder, likely it'll pass on to a daughter and father to a son, or is gender irrelevant? Gender is irrelevant, it's the gene. There are different ways that you talk about what contributes to a mental health condition, right? And there are different factors that can contribute. There is the biological, which includes something like hormones, genetics, your brain functioning. There's so much that can actually contribute to how you experience your emotions, right? But as for the question, gender is irrelevant. If it's in the genes, you can be what we call vulnerable to develop a mental health condition. But some people have the gene for mental health conditions, but they don't experience a mental health condition because they perhaps have a good support system and so on. So there are multiple things. There's biological factors, there are psychological factors, and there are social factors. And us being South Africans, we've got a history, we've got other issues that sometimes also contribute to someone, developing a mental health condition. So there are multiple factors, but as for your question, the gender is not relevant. It's the gene, the actual gene. Some people would easily blame something. Sorry, I just lost my space. Some people would easily blame something for how they feel rather than accept that their mental health is low. Why is it so scary to admit you need help? I think that if you're referring to it in the Muslim community, some of the things I spoke about earlier is exactly the reason why people don't talk about it, because of the way it has been historically understood, that it is something that either, it's because you're not making enough salah, or, you're not reading Quran enough, or because, for various other reasons. And I think because of the negative stigma attached to mental health conditions, people don't want to say that my mental health is low. People don't want to say that I need help, because also some people don't want to feel like they are not able to function by themselves, that they need someone else to assist them with functioning. But the thing is that, in life, we have different kinds of challenges, and people are affected differently based on the kind of makeup that they have. And there are so many things, we won't have enough time to discuss the amount of things that can actually affect how you experience life, how you look at the world. There are so many things that would affect that. So sometimes people, people don't want to feel like they are not able to actually just function by themselves. They don't want to feel like they need the help. But for everybody, it can be different. People can have different reasons for why it's difficult for them to say, my mental health is low, I need help. But hopefully, inshallah, we can change this. For a 50-year-old female person, I can say that only the help of Allah can function normal in society. I have been off meds for most. And the thing with medication is, shukran for sharing that. The thing with medication, many people are afraid of being on medication, especially for the mental health condition. But medication is not meant to be, forever. There are certain conditions that do require chronic medication, but for many conditions, the medication is used just until the person is able to get out of that state, and then with psychological service, be able to function normally after that. And usually, the psychiatrist will wean people off the medication. So medication is not always, something that people have to be on for a very, very long time. Where can you go if you can't afford assistance, especially for anxiety and depression? There are, I think I'm going to share some resources with Muslims Connected to share with people, but just quickly, there's a South African depression and anxiety group. They have a website. They sometimes have groups and things. Their services are all free. I lecture at Stellenbosch University. We have a clinic that our students, where they train, so that students see the clients and we supervise them. So all of the universities, most of the universities at least, they have sometimes clinics associated with the university. There are also places like the Counseling Hub and Observatory where they do charge, but a minimal fee like 50 Rand. There's FAMSA. In some areas, there are also organizations that offer free mental health services. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share that information with Muslims Connected to share with everyone. And yeah, I'll share those details. A contact number for my practice, I will share that with Muslims Connected as well, and they can give you all of that details after the talk. How do you get tested for having ADHD for an adult? Usually with ADHD, there's an assessment. It's a very short assessment. So a psychologist, even an educational psychologist, can assess you. And usually if you meet the criteria, then you can be diagnosed. And again, you can, you can have education on how to function with ADHD. And there are many people who choose or opt not to take medication, but to manage the ADHD. So again, that is something that you can learn with your psychologist and with an OT. How many males and females are joined in on this conversation? I actually don't know. I haven't checked, and I don't know if we are able to check how many people have tuned in tonight. I know that it's being streamed on a second platform, so I don't know if we'll be able to get a proper tally. But you're right; it would be interesting. And I'm hoping that these are things that we can change, so that we can make the discussion and the talks about mental health less scary. As we know, bipolar can cause lots of recklessness when the mania strikes. I just wanted to know if Allah holds us accountable for consuming intoxicants or being promiscuous during that state of mind, and will Allah hold us accountable for not making salam? This is something that I unfortunately cannot answer, but I do know that Allah is most merciful. And like I said, when you are in the state, there are rulings on whether you are by your full senses when you in a normal state. And of course, mental health conditions is, by default, it means that the person is not functioning like they normally would, that there is something happening with them that they're not able to function the way they normally would. I'm diagnosed with bipolar and depression. I am on various medications, but have high anxiety over and above meds. What can I do? Again, there are different kinds of psychological therapies that can help firstly to understand your conditions, and then how to learn how to manage and how to live with it. I work with many people who have anxiety, in fact, and for many of them, it's about learning how to manage the anxiety. I can tell you that anxiety is something that doesn't go away. It's something that you learn how to manage. And, with certain techniques, you can learn how to manage it and be less anxious. But so like I mentioned earlier, you have medication that treats certain conditions and certain stages of conditions. And then, of course, you can also seek psychological services to assist you with learning how to actually function with your mental health condition and how to manage it. Learning about how to manage your stresses and how to respond when you do have difficulties and when you do have challenges. How do you address someone who doesn't know they have a problem and need help? This is often a question we get. It's such a difficult question to answer because it's very difficult when the person does not think that they need help. And I can tell you that we can sometimes see that people need help, but if they cannot see that themselves, one can always encourage, and if it's a close friend, I'm sure if it's a relationship that is really close, one can say, this is something that I've noticed, and I wonder if you would consider this. But further than that, we cannot force people to get help. We can just encourage them, and we can support them. But at the same time, that we also need to have boundaries in place. Sometimes people don't recognize that they need help, but they don't realize how draining they can be on the next person. And so you must decide, how much you can manage. and say that, you know what, this is as far as I can go. I think you need help. And until you get that help, then we can, connect again. So again, it's different for different people. It's, I think it's often on a case-by-case basis. And I answer the questions, but, sometimes it's different for different people. Aslams, shukran so much for the du'as. Last year, August, my little sister of 21 committed suicide. She was diagnosed with bipolar and chronic anxiety for about 6 years prior. I just can't clear my mind of her year after. I know we can't judge for the Almighty. People say Allah's will. And I do believe that her overdose or her actions would have worked if Allah will so. Just something I'm finding very difficult to accept. She's in my every dua, action of good, and I make dua that we are all united in Jannah. Amen. And I think it's very difficult for family who are left behind, especially because of the sensitive topic of suicide and Islam and what place it has. And this is why I think that we actually need a separate discussion, Marv, to talk about this, because I think that people are sometimes not aware how often this happens in the Muslim community. I think there are many things that we don't realize is happening. And the problem with not acknowledging that these things happen or not taking note of it or paying attention to it is that it, again, is left untreated. And if we can change how we think about mental health, how we talk about mental health, how we support people with mental health, then perhaps we can save people from choosing an option that is, that is final. Is social phobia also a mental health issue? Yes, it is. I suffer from it badly. I'm very scared to speak to people. However, typing out makes me less anxious. I'm glad that you have shared this. Yes, it is a mental health issue. It's one of the anxiety conditions, and it is something, again, that can be treated. So I would like to encourage you to seek out help, find out where, I'm going to share some resources and see if you can access some support close to you where you can actually learn how to address the social phobia. Being angry at how you are treated by others despite your kindness, is this recognized as having mental health issues when you struggle to forgive? Not necessarily a mental health condition, but it could be a struggle. But again, questions like this that are quite specific, it's very difficult to answer without having all of the information. When you see a psychologist, for those of you who have been to a psychologist, you'll know that we do quite a comprehensive interview in the beginning of the therapy, because we need enough information to be able to assist you. So this kind of information is very limited and very difficult for me to answer. But like I said, whatever I don't answer, I'll try to think about how the topics that we can discuss may perhaps in future talks where you can get more information on these things. But I will, like I said, share information where you can also get resources to read more on these topics. My mom has a mental health issue. However, this is creating difficulty for me to get married. Again, that is very limited information, so it's difficult for me to comment on that. But perhaps you can contact me, and I can see if I can't assist you, if I can point you in the right direction. I was diagnosed with depression many years ago, and my father decided that I should stop going to see the psychologist and stop using my medication. However, I feel like 10 years later, I still suffer from something, or like something is still wrong with me. I used to suffer from epilepsy. However, it was witchcraft, and alhamdulillah, I'm cured, but everything in my life is falling apart. I'm over my head in debt and currently unemployed and expecting my second child from a failed relationship. I don't know what's happening in my life. I make my salah and believe that Allah makes things happen for a reason, but I've reached a point where I'm questioning. I don't know what to do anymore. Again, I think I'm going to share those resources. If you have been diagnosed with depression and you have been on medication, then I think you need to make contact with a psychologist again to try and start a process again, start therapy again, so that you can be assisted with managing whatever symptoms you're experiencing at the moment. And it sounds like there's quite a bit that you're experiencing. And remember, I think, I don't know, I've interacted with many people, and especially when I started my studies in psychology, the kind of feedback you get from people, especially Muslims, about going into this field, and the kind of people that you might work with and so on. But I think that psychology is also a space where you can think things through. I often tell my students that when clients come to you, there's usually chaos in their heads, and you help them to find clarity. And this is what we do. So if you are struggling to figure things out, psychology is also a space that can assist. It's not only for mental health conditions, but sometimes even just with life challenges, you can get assistance with figuring things out and thinking of ways on how to, to get out of the chaos that you're experiencing. What have you found to be unhealthy coping mechanisms for people with mental health issues? A family member is struggling with sexuality and has been struggling addiction for the past several years. We've encouraged him many times to seek professional help, but he's been referred to places where they are taught to accept that they're created to be attracted to the same gender. I think this is why, for me, mental health in Islam is important. And I think this is why you find that Islamic psychology is a growing field. It's because sometimes we need people to be treated by a Muslim health professional who can, who can assist them with this kind of difficulty. You mentioned addiction, that is an unhealthy coping mechanism. There are many, I'm trying to think of one right now, but there are so many unhealthy coping mechanisms. And sometimes you don't even recognize that it's one. It seems like something normal, but it actually is an unhealthy coping mechanism. I'm going to, like I said, I'll leave my details. Perhaps you can contact me and I can try and refer you to a Muslim psychologist. Can you please elaborate on twitching? I used to twitch a lot after my divorce. Can you also elaborate about agoraphobia, anxiety related? I know that there's going to be a talk later on. I'm not sure the exact date, because a colleague of mine will be talking about anxiety. But yes, twitching and things like that you find in some anxiety conditions, and then also in other conditions. Agoraphobia, it is anxiety related. There's quite a bit of conditions that fall under the anxiety category. It maybe has a different theme. Like for some, it's in social spaces. For some, it's having phobias of certain things, of heights or of needles, or so there are quite a bit of conditions that fall under the anxiety category. And twitching and things like that, sometimes they come about because of a mental health condition. But yeah, I think if you are able to get treatment, then perhaps it can assist, because the less stress there is, the less anxiety there is, the better one is able to manage yourself. What is your opinion on the role of jinn and evil and causing mental health issues? Why is it that at times when people don't take psychiatric medication and seek help through certain actions and recitation of Quran and Adhd, that there is healing and cure? Like I said, that I mentioned this in the talk, that as Muslims we do believe also in jinn and evil eye. And as I mentioned, I do believe in the unseen, and I believe that it can cause symptoms that mimic mental health issues. But I still think that if this is the case, it won't always be the case. This is what I'm trying to say, that sometimes it may be that, sometimes it may be depression and anxiety. So what we need to do is be able to work together to be able to do an assessment, evaluate, make a diagnosis. If it is that it is jinn and evil eye, then you get treatment, like you said, from the recitation of Quran and Adhd, which is the healing and the cure. But if it is depression and anxiety, you get treatment from a psychiatrist or a psychologist in order to treat. So this is my personal view. I know in my research I found that there are many Muslims who like me believe in the unseen world, but I have come across Muslims who either have not been taught about this or have not grown up and do not understand or do not subscribe to the unseen world. So I do think that it does exist, that it can mimic the issues, but I think when you do an evaluation, you need to make sure to see which one is it. And this is what I'm proposing, that when we do an evaluation and it happens to be anxiety or depression or any other mental health condition, that it is referred to the appropriate source in order to receive appropriate treatment. Does medication reduce anxiety over the long term? Medication can reduce, but what is also useful is to learn through a psychologist or psychological services how to manage anxiety, which can also reduce anxiety experience. So in some cases, anxiety is treated with medication. In some cases, it is treated only with therapy. In some cases, it is treated with both. It depends on the level of the anxiety, the type of anxiety, and it's usually done by a case-by-case basis. How can parents speak to the young children about mental health and depression and encourage the openness of feelings and steps to help early or mild depression. I think that as a start, we need to acknowledge when our children do talk about their feelings. We do not have to start by having a whole conversation about depression and all of that, just to be able to be present with children and allow them to talk about their feelings to us and acknowledge when they do have feelings, to acknowledge those feelings. I'm going to tell you a quirky story about my son. He's 4 years old. So sometimes when he has to be put to bed, he's very angry because his siblings who are much older than him are still awake. And I would always say to him, you know, I'm sorry that you're feeling angry, and it's okay to be angry, but unfortunately you still have to go and sleep. So it's about just acknowledging what the child is feeling, and that makes a big difference in how the child experiences those emotions. And then they'll come to you each time they experience a difficulty or a challenge, they will come to you. And like I said, you know, the knowledge is really so open today. It's easy to get information and to educate ourselves as parents on how to deal with certain things. But more than that, when it comes to parents, I think it's very important for parents to understand children and their development, where they are at in their lives or the stages of development, because this, you know, depending on which stage they are at, they will deal with things differently. They will understand things differently. And if we can understand that, it will make the interaction much easier with your child if you can understand at which stage they are at. Any advice for teachers who work with learners with barriers to learning, please? I'm not sure what, you know, in which environment you work in. When there's barriers to learning, I think we should actually get an OT on as well. I'm saying this to Muslims Connected, who can perhaps answer that question much better than what I can. I think a lot of patience, firstly, and I'm not sure if you are at a school that offers learning support, but that obviously would help. And just, I think for teachers, it can be quite difficult if they, especially in the environments where they have to deal with, you know, many children and do not have the space to, you know, to see to a child who perhaps has a learning difficulty. I know and I recognize and acknowledge that is very difficult. But I think I'm going to park this also for a later discussion. Maybe we can have a topic of learning disorders. I'm very aware of the time, and I know that we are over time, and there's still a couple of more questions. I think I'm going to maybe do 1 or 2 more, and then what I'll do is, like I said, I'll try to respond to the other questions, or I'll give my information so that if I haven't answered your question, you can make contact with me, and I'll also speak to the Muslims Connected team to see if we can do some more seminars on different topics that have come up that may be important to, you know, to have a full discussion on. Let me just see what else is there. Someone also wanting to be considered for my study. I think when you have my details, you can make contact with me. What causes anxiety? Is it due to personal experiences early in your life? As I mentioned earlier, there's a combination of factors that would contribute to developing something like anxiety or any other mental health condition. It can be personal experiences in your life. It can be, you know, social situations. It can be biological reasons. So it can be genetics. It can be learned behavior. Maybe your parent was anxious. So there are a number of reasons, but yes, it can be your own experiences in your early life. How does one deal with a narcissistic parent? Lots of boundaries, but again, I think that's that's just a quick answer. But again, I think educate yourself on what the traits are of narcissistic personalities. With any kind of personality issues, boundaries are very, very important. And I must mention this. What I find very interesting when I'm working with Muslim clients, whenever it is a parent that they are dealing with where there are challenges or difficulties, there's always this, I don't know what word to use, but where there's this conflict that they experience, because obviously we are taught that we have to treat our parents with respect and that our parents, we have them on a platform and all of that. And so it's very difficult for people when they need to set boundaries with parents who maybe have a mental health condition, or who are, displaying personality traits that are actually, un-Islamic. So people often find conflict with this, because I'm supposed to treat my parents in a certain way, but then also there's this, so how do I do that? Or especially with people where the parents were not involved in their life, and trying, that conflict between, I'm trying to do what is right, by my parent, but they're not acknowledging me, or they're not, engaging in a relationship with me. What do I do? So it's very difficult, I know, for people in different situations. But again, I think that firstly, educate yourself on what narcissism is. And then, it wouldn't hurt even for you to engage in a process where you can learn how to set those boundaries and how to deal with that kind of personality. How to deal with social anxiety. It affects me even if I'm just going out and socializing with family. It causes depression as well. Any tips? Anxiety is something, there are usually stresses, and especially with social anxiety, it is the anticipation of how you will be evaluated in the social space that brings on the anxiety. So the first thing that I usually teach clients when it comes to anxiety is how to manage the symptoms of anxiety, because anxiety is something that has physiological symptoms. So you feel it in your body. You would be perhaps hyperventilating, your body feels warm, you feel dizzy, you have chest pains, you just, your stomach feels like it's all butterflies and things. So it's one of those conditions that actually has a lot of physiological symptoms. And that experience of that, you're walking into the room, you suddenly become very sweaty, and you are very aware of what's going on with you, and you become so focused on that it makes socializing even more difficult, right? So the first thing that I usually teach clients when it comes to anxiety is how to manage those symptoms, because if you can manage that, it does make it easier to socialize. But at the same time, one has to go to the because those are just the symptoms, but one also has to go to the cause on what brings on the anxiety. And it usually has to do with how people think about themselves in those situations. So you would work with both. So the first thing, learn to do deep breathing. There's nice distraction techniques. And, there's so many things that I find in psychology that exist in Islam, things like reflection, things like mindfulness. These are all things that we actually have in Islam, and we need to start making use of it. But again, there are many online platforms that has resources. I actually have a nice book. It's meant for children, but I find it so useful. I share it with adults, that talks about how to understand and how to deal with anxiety. So what I'll do is I will, if you would like a copy, I'm going to leave my email address. Please do email me and I'll share it with you. How does one learn to stop excessive worrying? Almost in the same way that I've just explained. Excessive worrying is one of the symptoms of anxiety. And again, one would learn techniques on how to problem solve, how to plan, how to deal with the kind of worries that we have, because anxiety is something that is brought on by uncertainty and excessive thinking, but irrational thinking. And so what I do, again, from the modality that I work, is that I would teach people how to think more rationally in a situation. But with something like anxiety, it's very skills based. So I would teach you many techniques and skills on how to manage the anxiety. I think I'm going to stop there because it's already 1:45, and I know there's a couple of questions that I haven't gotten to. But what I'll do is I will be in touch with Muslims Connected. I will share some resources. I will also share my contact details. If I haven't answered your question and it's really, really important and you'd really like me to answer, please email me and I'll try to answer. I'm going to keep some of the questions. I think that there are some future topics in there that we could go into in more detail. So I'll make a note of all of that. I apologize if I haven't answered some of your questions, but I really, I think that some questions need more time and we need more time. But I will be in touch with Muslims Connected to try and get all those questions answered. So shukran so much for everyone who has participated or has attended rather, I forget that I'm not teaching, who has attended the talks this evening. I really appreciate the support, and I really appreciate some of the comments and the du'as that people have made. And I hope to be back here on this platform so that we can talk some more, and we can, as I mentioned, that we together as a community, we can think about how to, how to create more awareness, how to educate people, and how to make a change. Shukran so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.